At every parent-teacher conference since I was a little chubby boy, almost all my teachers told my parents I was a gifted child. And they always said it like someone informing you that your uninsured house is on fire. But hey, at least it's architecturally significant. Your boy is wicked smart, they said. And that but carried everything. The phone calls home, the permanent spot outside the classroom, the discussions they had about me in staff meetings. I wasn't dangerous, just inconvenient. See, I wasn't disobedient in the traditional sense. I wasn't throwing things, I didn't start fights. I just had this inexplicable habit of standing up in the middle of lessons and walking around. Not storming off, just moving, wandering. Like a visiting inspector with massive hemorrhoids. I built contraptions out of pens, turned my pencil case into a pulley system. The teacher asked me what I was doing and I told her I was experimenting with force. She said that was fine, but could I please do it silently and on paper? I asked if Newton did it silently and on paper. She gave me the Indian school version of detention, which is sitting on the floor at the corner of the room, which I guess is still a lot better than being made to stand outside like I had to do for all the other classes. I never understood how to not be like that, I couldn't sit still, couldn't shut up, and couldn't understand why everybody else seemed to be following some invisible instruction manual I just never got a copy of. And I didn't understand why this was even a problem. I was still learning, just not the stuff they were teaching, or not in the order that they wanted me to learn it. That was the real crime, bad timing. I was always a few beats off, behind, ahead, sideways. I knew things I wasn't supposed to know, and couldn't seem to remember the things everybody else found obvious. I kept poking holes in John Dalton's atomic theory. Atoms aren't indivisible, what the fuck? Must have been pretty annoying for the chemistry teacher to see that. Exams were a recurring humiliation, like slow suffocation with the painted-on smile. Not because I didn't know the content, but because the process of sitting in silence for 2 hours and converting thoughts into answers felt like trying to thread a needle during a hurricane. My brain rebelled against the format. I'd open the paper and immediately start daydreaming about whether I could pretend to shit myself and just fuck off to Okinawa. I would answer one question and then drift off into some mental side alley. Sometimes I would doodle, sometimes I'd write alternate endings to the questions. I genuinely wrote the answers in haiku, and the teacher didn't appreciate the effort. There's a correct number of syllables per line, she said, but not for long division. I think I still got the answer right though, somehow. I wasn't failing outright, just consistently and methodically underperforming. A kind of anti-miracle. The story was always the same, brilliant but distracted, gifted but lazy, potential for greatness if only he applied himself. I heard that phrase so often it started to feel like a curse, and it hurt just a bit more every time I watched my parents hear it. A prophecy of future disappointment. When I moved to Canada for university, I assumed things would improve. This was supposed to be different. Canada had snow bunnies, free healthcare, and the reputation of being chill. I assumed I'd be allowed to be weird here. I imagined something more open-ended, more tolerant of oddballs like me. And in some ways it was. But that only applies to crackheads and politicians. I told a nurse practitioner at the campus clinic that I couldn't concentrate, couldn't sit down to study, couldn't finish anything without some internal civil war. I told her I felt constantly agitated, overwhelmed, behind. She nodded sympathetically and immediately prescribed me SSRIs. It was like ordering a sandwich and getting soup. "You'll love it," she said. "It's what everybody's having." Apparently I was depressed and anxious. I didn't question it at the time. I assumed she knew what she was doing. It must be some vague, broadly defined sadness that I didn't quite recognize, but figured must be mine. But the medication did not make me better. It made me quiet, which to a system that values silence and compliance looks like improvement. But inside I felt disconnected from myself. I stopped caring about lectures, about deadlines, about my friends. It wasn't that I got less distracted. I just no longer cared enough to notice the distractions. My thoughts were still scattered, but now they were underwater. And I lost close to 8 kilograms. Freshman 15 went in the opposite way. You could see my ribcage. When I visited home for the summer, my mom started crying looking at how skinny I was. I once spent 2 hours staring at the ceiling of the library, unable to remember why I was there. I wasn't sad, just absent. Like I'd been hollowed out and left on autopilot. It was the first time I'd experienced depersonalization. Like watching your own life from somewhere behind your own eyes. I didn't care enough to chase anything. You could have shown me a bomb going off and I'd probably have said, wonder what page I was on. Eventually I stopped taking the pills. I don't remember making that decision. I think I just forgot one day and never went back. The fog lifted gradually, but the confusion stayed. In first year physics, the second term, I sat in the front row. Not because I was ambitious, but because I couldn't focus from the back. Too many heads, too many smells. Some guy in row 13 kept peeling and eating boiled eggs with canned sardines. Distance made things abstract, and I needed proximity. I needed to see the chalk hit the board. I'd ask too many questions, fidget, forget to take notes. Occasionally mutter calculations under my breath like I was summoning a demon. One day after class, the professor pulled me aside. "You have ADHD," he said, like he was pointing out I left my pants unzipped. "You should talk to someone about that." And that was it. No performance of concern, no suggestion of failure. Just a statement of fact. It was the most accurate diagnosis I had ever received. 6 months later, Canadian efficiency at its finest, folks. After a waitlist long enough to kill a greater man, I walked into a psychiatrist's office. It sounds like the start of a Norm Macdonald joke, but there's no punchline to this. The appointment lasted 10 minutes. 2 of those were pleasantries. He watched me interrupt him 3 times, forget what I was saying mid-sentence, and rearrange his stapler while answering a question. "You've got ADHD," he said, barely looking up from his notes. "Classic case, literally textbook. At least make it interesting for me." I asked him why it had taken so long for anyone to tell me this. He shrugged. "You were too smart to fail completely. That's the curse." It made sense. For the first time in my life, it made sense. Everything. The detentions, the restlessness, the bizarre tension between my curiosity and paralysis. It all clicked into place. There wasn't anything wrong with me. There just hadn't been a name for it. Adderall didn't fix me. It just gave me the ability to sit still long enough to finish things. My GPA rose faster than a crypto rug pull during a bull market. I could study without experiencing what can only be described as full-body existential revulsion. Not easily, not gracefully, but for the first time, I could will myself into a task and remain there without agony. It didn't feel like a superpower. I could just read textbooks now. I could take notes. It was like I had finally been allowed to use the tools everybody else had been using all along. It gave me the ability to focus long enough to actually notice how much I'd been failing, which was ironically a bit depressing. I could finally sit still, and all I wanted to do was get up and apologize to every teacher who said I had potential. There were a few side effects starting out. For about 3 months, I had the libido of a teenage raccoon on cocaine. I once got turned on by a particularly well-commented Python script, which honestly is the telltale sign of a good programmer. And Adderall always has and still does make me grind my teeth a lot and sends my hyperfocus into overdrive. Hyperfocus isn't concentration, it's not flow. It's more like getting trapped in a tunnel and deciding it's a good place to live. It happens when something, a task, a thought, a song, a Wikipedia rabbit hole about hemlock foraging, locks into your brain and refuses to let go. You lose track of time, you forget to eat, you ignore people, you abandon all other obligations. Sometimes you forget your own name. Sometimes you forget you have a body. I'll run you through some pros and cons. So, the good stuff. Creative output on God mode. You can write 3,000 words in a single sitting, build an app in a weekend, produce music, edit a video, design an entire system for no reason at all. When hyperfocus aligns with something valuable, it feels like a superpower. Your brain stops negotiating and just does the thing. There is no resistance, no boredom, just pure frictionless propulsion. Problem solving at obsessive depth. Hyperfocus makes you dive deeper than necessary, which is exactly what innovation often requires. You look at problems from angles that wouldn't occur to someone with a more rational attention span. You'll read 20 research papers on something just to be able to write 3 better lines of code. Sometimes it pays off. Sometimes it's insane. It's mostly insane. But that edge, that obsessive need to go beyond, can produce beautiful accidents. And then there's my favorite, the temporary peace. Ironically, hyperfocus is the only time ADHD feels like it stops. The noise dies down. The distractions go quiet. There's one task, one thread, one thing. And it becomes the whole world. For people who spend most of their lives overstimulated, fragmented, and flooded, that kind of mental silence is so fucking good. But then there's also bad stuff. Everything else collapses. You're writing the best script of your life, but you haven't responded to your boss's message from 3 hours ago. You're redesigning a website, but your edamame is burnt to shit. You're building a model, but your grandma's birthday passed you by and now she's put out a hit on you. Hyperfocus consumes context. You forget time exists. You forget other people exist. You forget the task isn't the only task. It's not that you ignore responsibilities, it's that they literally disappear. Everything does. You forget to pee, you forget to blink. Your posture degrades into something that evolutionary biologists would describe as troubling. You emerge from a hyperfocus session sweaty, malnourished, and dehydrated, yet oddly euphoric. You can't control what you hyperfocus on, and that is the cruelest joke of all. You might hyperfocus on your novel, or on sorting your bookmarks for 3 hours, or on rewriting your past 10 grocery lists in descending order of protein content. You don't get to choose. It's like pulling gacha with the usual terrible odds of success. And then there's the crash. Hyperfocus ends abruptly, not gently, not politely. The dopamine spike dies, and then you're left with a pile of unfinished thoughts, and a body that feels like it's been beaten with sleep deprivation and crumbs. And often there's guilt, because everything you didn't do comes flooding back. Hyperfocus gives you a brief window of clarity followed by a heavy invoice. I worked as a data scientist. It's a good job for someone like me who's varied, pattern-driven, and a little messy. There's always a problem to overthink. Always a lot more where that came from. Sometimes I don't even realize I have solved the wrong problem until I've already built a dashboard, written a memo, and started a philosophical essay about it, which depending on who you ask is either a clinical issue or a sign of creativity. ADHD makes the job harder, but it also makes it possible. I automate things not because it's efficient, but because the idea of doing the same thing twice fills me with deep and irrational dread. I've written more functions out of boredom than necessity. Sometimes I build entire pipelines just to avoid using Excel. I jump between tasks too much. But I also connect dots nobody else thinks to connect. I've accidentally invented very popular features by misunderstanding the requirements. My brain doesn't like linear paths, it likes spirals and webs and tangents, and data, in all its messy, contradictory glory, with nil context, responds well to that. ADHD gives me restlessness, but that can be really productive since it also gives me range. In the space of a week, I'll work on a machine learning pipeline, record a music demo, outline a bottom tier video about Greek cynicism, write another chapter of the book I'm working on, and start a spreadsheet comparing Tokyo apartment sizes. I obviously don't finish everything, but that's not the point. ADHD makes life wider, if not deeper, and sometimes that width is enough to stumble into answers by accident. Of course, there's also the other side. I almost forget meetings. I get decision fatigue from the chili oil aisle. I always end up getting the classic chili crisp from Laugan Ma, but only after going through all the other options. I interrupt people without meaning to. I feel guilt about things I haven't done yet. Sometimes things I haven't even agreed to do. My messages are a graveyard of good intentions. Entire afternoons vanish like socks in the dryer. There's a German word for it, probably. If you know that word, comment below or send a carrier pigeon to Mike Tyson's house. People think ADHD is about not paying attention, but that's not quite right. It's more like paying attention to everything at once and not knowing which part to hold on to. Your brain wants novelty, it wants stimulation and feedback. Not because you're shallow, but because that's the only thing it registers as real. And once you know that, you can start working with it instead of apologizing for it. Life is not structured, but it has a shape you can learn to recognize even when the lights go out. Most people, if not ignoring it outright, try to manage ADHD the way landlords manage mold, by painting over it. But it doesn't work like that. You can't discipline it away. You can't shame it into submission. You have to design around it, not fix, reorient. And here's what I've learned in my 25 years of living with ADHD. Slowly, resentfully, and through a lot of personal trial and professional embarrassment. Design for impulse, not discipline. See, discipline is for people whose brains comply with intention, mine doesn't. So I've stopped trying to motivate myself and started building traps. If I want to write, I will open the doc before my brain remembers how much it hates the act of writing or doing anything. If I have a song I need to get finished for a video, I leave my guitar on the bed. I start timers before I can talk myself out of them. I reward progress like I'm training a dog that happens to only talk in zigzag quotes. Don't confuse structure with rigidness. A structure is a pattern, it's a rhythm, something to lean on. Rigidity is a cage for the singing bird. You need rituals, not rules. You need to scaffold the day with small, repeatable cues. Wake up, move, eat, focus, replenish. Not perfectly, not always, never perfectly, but consistently enough to survive your own mind. I try to wake up around the same time every day, mostly because if I don't, my circadian rhythm starts acting like it's in a terrible relationship with the sun. And if you know Vancouver, the sun's not around that much. Routine gives the illusion of control. You need that. You're not trying to become a robot, you're just trying not to become a character in a Kafka story. Novelty is a great dopamine hack, but if you let it run wild, you will burn out. So rotate, layer tasks, use interest as propulsion but not direction. Chase things, but name what you're chasing. Otherwise, you end up with 6 half-finished passion projects and a desk covered in post-its full of nonsense. Time blindness is real. Outsource chronology. You don't feel time properly. It's not a character flaw, it's neurological. Use alarms, calendars, reminders, write things down. Treat time as an external system because for us, it is. And that's okay. Lastly, forgive the delay. There will always be a gap between what you intend and what you actually do. You will forget things. You will drop balls, drift off. Don't make it worse by attaching shame to it. ADHD is a lag. It's not a failure, not a defect. Just a delay in transmission. Restart again. Eventually something will stick. You'll disappoint people, you'll forget things, you'll spiral. Start again. Start terribly. Start mid-sentence. Shame is heavier than failure and less useful. Drop it. ADHD isn't a gift, but it's also not a curse. I think the best metaphor for it is a door that usually only opens when your house is burning down. And sometimes when you walk in through the door, you discover an entirely new room with a grand piano and no walls. And I think that's pretty cool. So, I'm doing alright. I'm not fixed, but I'm understood. Which is more than I ever used to be. And most days, that's all I need.